really cool. So I'm not actually using a gate. This is the Wave Studio Verse, and I only use it for this. I'm really proud of this. It's really cool. So what I'm doing, a way more transparent gate. So you're losing all that bleed from everything else while keeping the dynamic of the snare. It's probably my favorite thing. When I throw this on a snare and I'm like, it's so good.
Hi and welcome back to the home recording studio. Recently I had one of my tracks mixed by a professional engineer called GI Holm, and what I saw in his session completely changed how I think about mixing. In this video he talks me through his complete template, including a really unusual technique for controlling drum bleed, which isn't your typical gate, and it works incredibly well. If you're mixing your own tracks, then there's probably a lot in this interview that you're missing. So let's check it out, and here we go.
So yeah, mix as a whole. I do a lot of like top-down mixing. So my initial approach is just get everything loaded in, drop the faders down to like minus 10 dB. And then just kind of listen and see, like get a general volume and pan set. And really just kind of see how far I can take it with just volume. Because at the end of the day, like, you know, I think we can romanticize the process of mixing when really all we're trying to do is balance. So just get it as far as I can with just doing balancing levels. The vocals were really consistent all the way through, so I didn't have to do much to them. But if it's like a really dynamic track or the vocal has a bit of a weaker mic technique, I'll actually go through and do clip gain riding through the whole vocal track to get it as consistent as possible and make sure that once I get the balance of the instrumentation all set, the vocal with just gain automation sits on top the instrumental, and then start doing my processing to it. But yeah, so usually like I start getting the drums balanced and feeling good, add the bass in, get the guitar sitting right, and then the vocal sits on top of it all. I find with drums, I try to use as little gating as possible, because the drums are so dynamic that for me, gates on toms, sometimes if you hit a crash hard enough, the crash is opening the gate. So I actually go through and I cut out the tom hits. But yeah, and I just find that is way more consistent than doing a gate. Kick, yeah, I don't think I really gated much, maybe. Oh yeah, just a bit on the SSL channel strip. Like for me with drums, I try to get as close as I can with just top down. So I'll do, once I get the levels of everything set, I go to my mix bus. So I have everything like into like vocal bus, guitar bus, keys bus, drums and bass bus, and those just have console emulation on them to kind of give them all their own flavor and character.
Yeah.
And then those all filter through into this mix bus. So I have the SSL vintage drive, just giving a little bit of transformer weight and glue, an EQ, and I usually have like my low and high bands already set. Just give a little boost in the low end, little boost up top, and then I'll sweep this high mid to kind of find where the snare cut is, and just I find helps the snare kind of push forward a bit in the mix. SSL compressor, and I try not to do much, like just have to glue it. Like I might do, like in the choruses, it might peak at like 2 dB reduction, but it's not meant to squish everything. It's just meant to kind of glue stuff and just kind of contextualize everything so it feels together. Yeah, like it's just kissing it, like 2 dB at most. And I like the 2-to-1 ratio, slowest attack. I just use the auto release unless it's like a really heavy track or like a punk or like a rock track that needs to be super punchy. Then I'll do like the 0.1 release, like super fast, so it's almost like really pumping. But I find the auto release just does something different that feels more like a glue compressor than like a pump, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'll do the pumping on the drums to give them more punch. But for the overall mix, I really like that auto. Like the trick to like having this side chain. So this is just telling it to ignore everything below a certain frequency. So this way, like my
Okay.
bass isn't overwhelming the compressor. Still have like a lot of the low end sub information from the kick and the bass without it totally, making the compressor work overtime. And really, I want to focus on, like 100 hertz up to like 5K with the
Yeah.
compressor, because that's what across all systems, that's what people are going to be able to hear. The super low stuff and the super high stuff is totally dependent on what the playback system is, and I have no control over that. So really, when it comes to like subs and low end, I try to not really focus too much time on it. Just make sure it's not like overwhelming, and it's more like, the mid-range, focusing on that, which is where this C4 comes in. So this is a multi-band compressor by Waves. It has this setting, this preset called multi-electro mastering. Like when you first open the preset, it's like this, but with a lot more range. And what I do is I bypass the low, so everything below 90 hertz. Not to say that because I don't care, but it's just, again, not every system's going to hear that. So it's not a huge concern to me. And then everything above 11K. These bands here aren't reacting to anything compression-wise. So that's like this stuff and that. So what this is doing is just like really, again, kind of gluing this mid-range together.
Yeah.
And it has, what I like about this is I have 90 up to like 5K, which is, everyone's going to hear this. So having that kind of work on its own to compress. Sorry, right here. And then from 5K up to 11K, this section can kind of get a little harsh. So having this is almost like a de-esser on the whole mix. Just, I can be a little more aggressive with cymbals and overheads and air on vocals and acoustics without it ever feeling harsh within a mix like that.
Okay.
So, like without it, still sounds great, but add it in and all of a sudden, like, you get like that snare starts to stand forward, some of the electrics push forward a bit more. It's just kind of like one of those like 10% moves where it just adds a little more polish and tightness to it. And then I just finished it off with this stereo imager from SSL. And I know this is default. Usually I just have it on the subtle mix bus enhancement. So that's pretty up the middle. And then with it, you just get a little more information out to the sides without it feeling like it's going, whoa, and opening the floodgates.
Yeah.
So that's how I start my mix, with just the leveling, and then that bus compression just out of the gate kind of glues it, gives me that EQ. Because on a lot of stuff, you're going to want a little bit more low end, a little bit more top end. So that's just getting done across the board. Then again, full range compressor, more of this mid-range compressor, and then the stereo imaging. On the drum bus, I'm using this, again, it's an SSL type compressor. What I like about this version of it is it has this grit, which just introduces like a transformer emulation.
Okay.
And I find that helps just kind of give some saturation and glue to the whole drum mix. So, and again, like barely kissing it.
Yeah.
But this grit, I find, brings out some weight, especially in the kick and the snare. Slowish attack, 10 or 30, just kind of depends on how I'm feeling. And then the fastest release, again, with like a 60 hertz high pass, so that the sub lows of the kick aren't overwhelming it, just kissing it, like 2 dB max. Because we're also already getting 1.5, 2 dB of reduction on the master bus, right? So I don't need to be looking at this meter and be like, oh, I need 4 dB of reduction, because with this hitting 1.5, 2 dB of reduction, and then what's happening on the master bus of it, there I'm getting my 3 dB, 4 dB of gain reduction if I need it. This is less so much about controlling transient and evening out the performance, and more just giving it a little more life and energy with that slower attack, fast release. So it kind of, really pushes the transients forwards and then sucks it all back. So those transients pop out nice. On the individual drum channels, I'll do a tape emulator. I really like this Kramer tape by Waves, just has something cool to it that I like. 15 IPs, and then I'm not looking to like smash it, especially on a mix like this. It has to be more organic. If it's like more of like an indie, more like a dirty or kind of grungy track, then I might push this a little bit harder and saturate it. The tape just kind of smooths off the spikiness of the transient so that your drums don't feel like they're jumping way out and then back in, and all you're hearing is the initial stick attack with that. So you're not getting the body of the drum. Whereas with this, a little bit of subtle saturation to bring the peaks down helps level the performance a bit, but also helps our ear hear more of the tail and more of the body of the drum than just the initial smack. And then on all of them, I just use an SSL channel for some EQ and compression. Because again, I'm already getting 3-4 dB from the bus compressor and then from the main mix. So really, I'm just looking at if the snare needs a little more cut, a little more pop. I might do 3 dB on this snare. Yeah, like it's just tickling the light. With a little bit of 8K, finding where that stick attack is. So on this one, it felt like it was around 3K for me. Yeah, like that kind of stuff just to help it cut. And then pulling out a little bit of like a kind of like a woof proximity effect from the snare being so close, which is like this kind of stuff. And then giving it a little more. It's funny, I'm taking it out, but right below I'm bringing up the fundamentals. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a balancing act between bringing the root of the drum out without bringing out some weird low mid stuff with it. So like that's our original snare sound, and that's just cleaned up a bit. You'll hear there's a gate going on, and really cool. So I'm not actually using a gate.
I've been using a service called Musiversal for around 6 months now. It's a monthly subscription service where you have access to many multi-talented instrumentalists, vocalists, audio engineers, basically anyone you would need to help you achieve the sound that you're trying to get. So this video is sponsored by Musiversal, and if you would like to try out their amazing services, then you can use my personal link and claim 25% off your first 3 months membership. You also skip the waiting list, which can be around 2 weeks. So check out my link, which is in the description, and sign up to Musiversal today.
This is the Wave Studio Verse, and I only use it for this because it allows me to create a parallel channel within the track.
Yeah.
So this is just our dry signal coming right out of the SSL. And then what I do, I'm really proud of this. It's really cool. So I use a compressor that's knocking off, like only engaging when the snare is getting hit, but taking out like 12 dB. And then I follow that up with this EQ, and I only use it to flip the phase.
Right.
So what I'm doing is, since that compressor isn't touching anything between the snare hits, it's putting them 180 degrees out of phase with each other to cancel them out.
Yeah.
And because of that gain reduction on the snare hits, there's a variation within the transient information, so that doesn't get affected by the phase reversal. So way, way more transparent gate, because you still get like a little bit of stuff, but you're not hearing it like this. So you're losing all that bleed from everything else while keeping the dynamic of the snare without losing any, because sometimes gates, like you'll lose a little bit of the top, they don't really tail off nicely. I can use the release of the snare to set how long the quote unquote gate stays open for. And then so all of this sums up in this parallel split. And then I use this dynamic EQ where I'm rolling off a high shelf, and this is actually opening on the snare hits to help really clean up any sort of hi-hat and cymbal bleed in it.
Okay.
So this is really focusing on this range here. So it's opening up for the initial attack, but then clamping down when we're just getting the tail of the drum, because there's nothing really above 3K in the tail off of the drum anyway. So that gets really nice clean snare for me. So, because without it, you know, we're hearing all that.
Somebody
So-
needs to make a dedicated plugin that does that. But kudos for your workaround. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite thing when I throw this on a snare and I'm like, it's so good.
and quick, I imagine.
Yeah, like I just have this preset set up, so as soon as I get the snare, I just load up my GI drum gate. Everything's already routed. I just have to, tweak the compressor so I'm not grabbing too much information between snare hits, and we're off to the races. And then what's nice too is there's this level, like there's this blend on this channel. So if I want to kind of back off how much it's reducing, it's kind of like a de-bleed sort of thing, right? So
Yeah.
that's my fun little trick.
Yeah, nice.
I should say too, on my on the drum bus itself, after the compressor, I'm just using an EQ. On a Neve, this will be 12K, pulling out a little bit of mud in like the 360 hertz, and then giving the kit as a whole a little boost at like 220. And that just seems to be a little bit of magic. I find a lot of times up until recently, everyone like looks at the drums as individual things, because everyone's like, oh, you gotta do this to your kick, and then you gotta do this to your snare, and this how you get the overheads. But again, no one hears them all separately, and because just the nature of drums, where it's like, okay, everything's gonna be in the overheads, everything's gonna be in the room mics, you're gonna have bleed, so I like to, again, just get them as balanced as possible with volume, glue them together with a little bit of compression, bit of saturation, and then I EQ the kit as a whole, because to me it's the drums. That's one element that then we can go into the individual parts of and be like, okay, maybe this snare needs a little more top end, but if I boost it on the bus, then my cymbals are gonna get brittle and harsh. So then you go into your individual channel processing. If you just start going in and soloing stuff, you're not going to know what it actually needs in context of the song, right? And what's masking what. So it's funny. It seems like such a simple thing, but for me at least, it took too long to kind of get my head around that concept. That it's okay to start with broad strokes. Like that's how you get the wall done, and then you go in and do your finishing details.
So I suppose in that case you have the close mics fairly low in the mix and let the overheads do more of the work, or just find that balance.
It's really just depends on how everything balances. Quite often I'll try, like I have this VU meter that I leave on my master out. So I'm setting my initial balances. Let's see if I was even good with it. So this is a little bit quieter than what I usually do. But I'm looking for the kick to kind of peak at about like 7 to 5 dB, which maybe if I take some of this stuff off, it gets up there a little bit closer. So I find once I get that level set and then I work everything else around it, it makes it way more consistent mix to mix. And then what I'm doing on here, because this is just a template for me. Like when I first open up a mix, it's these group channels with those effects already on them, settings already dialed in, and then all of my effect sends. So I don't have to set up any extra auxes or effect sends. I just get the individual, like the tracks from the client put in, route it all accordingly, get that kick up to like -7 dB, build everything around it, and then just start turning these guys on and making little subtle tweaks as need be. On like a pop country mix like this, like I am rolling off a fair bit of the shells.
Yeah.
So I'm using that more as a cymbal mic.
Guess so, yeah.
So yeah, like anything around there. But the close mics are so, like, feel so good on their own. And I am also routing them to a virtual drum room. Yeah. So
I sometimes use the Ocean Way one from UAD.
Yeah, I have that one. I don't have that in. I just got it. So I've been using that on some stuff. I was using the Sound City one for a while too. and IK Multimedia just released the version 2 of the Sunset Sound, where, like the UAD ones, how you can have your room plus like a chamber or a plate reverb on the, like, in parallel.
Okay.
Now IK allows you to do that. So you can use a live room and then also have the chamber or a plate or a spring or, another live room. So you can use 2 at the same time, which is cool because I do really like the sound of chambers on drums if there's like a lot of space to fill. So yeah, have this bass amp. I'm using the Kramer tape again just because I like, what it does. If there's any like heavy pick attack, this kind of dulls that a bit and then gives it a little bit more weight to the bass. 1176. This one's really smacking, but it was working for me. I don't like to look at meters. I'm just kind of like, dial it in until it feels right. This is something that I feel I've never used outside of this mix. I guess I was just feeling like trying it someday. It looks like I'm boosting a healthy amount of 1.5K to get a little more cut out of it. And then cutting a bit of 500 and then give another boost at like 100 hertz.
Yeah, because it was a little bit vanilla, the bass.
Yeah.
You've made it a little bit more gritty where it needs to be.
That'll mostly be this plugin here. This is the Escalator by Black Salt Audio.
Yeah.
And it's a saturator distortion type thing.
Okay.
But I love it on bass, again, because it just reacts to the low end in a really pleasing way to me.
Yeah.
And kind of fills out that low mid while adding a little bit of hair. So it's subtle, but it helps. Yeah. And then at the end of the bass channel, I'm just using an L1 limiter just to catch any of those peaks so nothing's really poking through. And you can see on the meter down here, it's just kind of like, that's the bass. This is how loud you're allowed to get. And then if there's any moments in a mix where I need it to jump out more, then I can just write that in, and it's a lot more predictable and controllable that way.
Yeah.
So, and that's because sometimes if I get like a bass amp plus a DI, I'll blend them, like mix them together just with volume, maybe do a bit of compression on the DI because that can be a little, little wild compared to the amp. And then I'll do this kind of processing to both channels as a whole on this bass group. But that's all that this channel is there for. Guitars are really simple because, again, we already have stuff happening on the master bus. So for the acoustic, I'm using different tape saturator because it has this 811 formula, which I find does something really nice to the top end, especially on guitars.
Okay.
So if I just mute everything on this acoustic channel. Just kind of opens up the top end a wee bit. And maybe take, like there's, on the strums, you hear a little bit of the, kind of the boominess on the initial strum.
Okay.
And I find this kind of cleans it up in like a nice way and just opens up the top end. EQ, just, high pass filter, a dynamic band.
Yeah.
At 150. Again, just to kind of keep out that boominess on the strums. Little dip here, probably just some weird high mid stuff. Yeah, just kind of an ugly tinny frequency. And then just a nice little light boost to bring out some of the attack without it running away. And then I'm squishing it a bit with the Renaissance Axe, which I don't totally know what all it's doing. Like, obviously it's compressing. Definitely feels like there's some sort of harmonic thing happening. Kind of really love it for guitars and any like really transient heavy stuff. So like guitars, any sort of like really plucky synths. It just works super easily. Just bring the threshold down, gain match, and this attack, obviously, on an acoustic, I'm not looking to take away and like squish the transient. On an electric guitar, if I really want to just smooth it out, I might have this at like, 5 to 8. But I just find this to be like super simple, setup for
Yeah.
getting a good tone quickly. And then it's a similar chain on the electrics. Again, this adds a nice bit of character to the upper mids and high end. Then, little low end roll off, taking out any sort of fizziness up top. This would have been a weird, like, resonant frequency that I just, pulled down and then just giving this section a boost. I remember I didn't want this to be like super cutty sounding, like super bright. But it just kind of fills that spot in the left side nicely. Then it looks like this guy didn't even compress.
It's almost like a solo part, that, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, and I just liked how it felt. Because with this, just kind of naturally comes in and out. And then yeah, this rhythm guitar. Didn't really want to mess with it too much. I find you can really get guitars sounding really kind of phased out and weird if you over EQ them. So
Yeah.
I try to do as little moves as possible. Maybe I'm lazy, but just, a little bit of, again, high pass, kind of some low mids, kind of any sort of fizzy sizzleness. And then finding every guitar is always going to have a weird resonant up high that just kind of makes it ugly, makes it hard to meld into the track. Yeah, and I think on this guy was yeah. So it would just been some of that pick attack. I wasn't super in love with, but then again, just a little bit of compression with the Renaissance axe on it. What's this guy doing? Oh yeah, this is a cool part. So again, same thing, just kind of limiting how much low end and how much of the highs are really taking space.
Sure. Yeah, that was a VST. It's Nashville toolkit by
by Ink Audio.
Ink Audio, yeah. Yeah, in that toolkit there's so many cool little things, like I think this was the guitar swells.
There's one called like the 335 Trem.
Yeah, it might be
really
that one.
Stick. Yeah.
It might be that, actually.
Yeah, because I just use that all over like a pop country production. And I'm like, this is the best like pad I've ever used for a country track.
So for like the beginnings or anywhere where you've got a bit of ambience to fill, the end, it's great for that.
Yeah. I've started using their pedal steel plugin.
Yeah.
Like not the one in the toolkit, but just a separate one.
The separate one, I've got that too, yeah. That's really good.
I love it. Vocals, I just start off with anything to give me a high pass. Like 120. Yeah. I find there's really nothing below 120 on a vocal, unless it's like a baritone voice or like a gospel thing with like a super low bass. R comp or just any compressor with a 5 millisecond attack, 20 millisecond release. I find that's just like the smoothest kind of setting. And then I'll go into an EQ. So this is, again, just because there was still some of this information poking through, taking out some of this boxy mid stuff to open it up.
Yeah.
And then some of this kind of nasally stuff when he's like really belting.
Yeah.
And then it had the room to give it some nice air. So yeah, 7 dB way up here. And then into the LA2A as just some that's like, it's kind of just kissing it, but it helps just rein it in a bit.
Yeah.
And then into an L1, because I find, we just had it there. Like, if a line comes in, it's like that, but like that can get really pokey. So this I'm just knocking off anything like that.
Yeah.
It's barely kissing it. Yeah, and that just helps keep it nice and level. We probably see it working too here. Yeah. This compressor, it's like, doing 6 to 10 dB. So, and then, we don't see the rest of them. There's more. De-esser, obviously. And then, so I used to use the CLA vocal for this, where I would turn off the EQ, the compression, the reverb, and just use it for the slap and stereo widening. But lately I've been doing this with the CLA Epic, where I still get the slap here. So I get the slap. Just subtle to give it a little bit of space. Yeah, a little bit of a longer delay, but pretty easy. And then this plate reverb. So I'm not doing a ton, not super wet vocal. Because there's enough going on instrumentally, and it's not like it's like a super poppy tune. So I wanted it to still feel organic as a vocal, not like an overproduced with all the delay throws and like big reverbs happening. So I do find that I like my vocals to be more natural, and I'm using that chain on the Harm vocal too, and the ad libs. As far as I could go. Now I lie here awake in the early dawn. It really helps when the parts, the quality of track, and the quality of song come back at a high level. Because I'm not trying to cover stuff up, and it's not like, maybe this vocal needs to just be sunk in a bit more because the singer wasn't really hitting it that day.
Yeah, no,
so
he's really good.
Yeah. But your arrangement is, and the parts are great, and they all fit together, so it was really easy to get through this one. There's sometimes I get tracks, especially if it's like Musiversal musicians playing on it. The client will just be like, "Oh yeah, here it is," and it's like there's obviously like acoustic playing through the whole thing, and then there's a guitar doing leads through the whole thing, and there's a banjo doing leads through the whole thing, and it's like. Because I get it where it's like, oh yeah, here's just a bunch of stuff, and then you can kind of sort through it. But the artist doesn't go through it, so it comes to me to mix, and I always find I'm spending like the first session of a mix doing the arrangement for them. Because I'm like, hey, I can get this banjo sounding great, but if it's constantly playing at the same time as the lap steel, it's not gonna feel right. There's gonna be no dynamic in your mix. So I do find as a mix engineer, I become a producer pretty quick with some of the stuff.
I can imagine. Yeah. Well, I mean, this one, I had to whittle it down because I knew I didn't want to put you in that situation. So it took a while to kind of narrow down what the exact arrangement would be, especially for the guitars, because there was quite a lot of different things. There's a lot that I've chopped out that you've never even seen, but
I can imagine.
Yeah, that's good to know that I've made the right decisions there. And again, I think with the guitars, I found that tricky in the rough mixes that I'd done. It was just, I think they were all just too high in the mix and just bright and competing with the vocal, and so that's half the battle. I think you've done a really good job with that, and squashing things back down, but you can still hear them clearly.
Great.
So brilliant.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been really useful to see your plugins and everything. So it's thank you.
You're very welcome.
So there we have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this interview. For me, working with musicians and engineers like GI from Musiversal has been a real game changer. I can see the improvement that it's made to my tracks, and if you want to do the same as I did, take the plunge, sign up using my link in the description, and you'll get 25% off your first 3 months, as well as skipping that waiting list. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.